Okay, so tonight we're going to go over the next project, which is the Revolve Vessel project. Essentially, what that means is we're just going to be using a different set of tools to create an object, create a body. In the first project, we use sketches on the XY axis, the regular work plane, like you're working on a tabletop. In this version, and just directly extruded it. In this version, we're going to be working straight up in front of you, like you're writing on board or something, in the XC or YZ plane, depending on what your preference. It really doesn't matter. XC would be right in front of you, in like a right in front of you plane. And instead of extruding directly, what we're going to be using is the Revolve tool, which then rotates that sketch around. So essentially, you'll actually only be needing to create half of a sketch and taking that profile and wrapping it around. A few things that go in with this project. Obviously, assignment, and ultimately what you're going to be making is a plant pot or a planter for like a little pot, or really you can make any vessel you want. Really doesn't matter. I'm not sharing the screen. But we're also going to work or discuss a different workflow. Workflow really refers to, you don't really need to have this. I've got that all going. Workflow refers to the steps you take in this. The other thing is, so far, we have just been working directly in going from sketches to bodies. This project will require multiple components. We're going to discuss the difference between components, sketches, and bodies. And then we're also going to use our previous project tools of extrude to instead cut into the body of this. So let's go over the actual assignment. Let me change over here. All right. So with this project, and this will be due sooner than later, but it's like 2 weeks, October 12th. In this project, you're to design a round vessel that's large enough for a small potted plant. And I know that's a relative term, but I do have dimensions down here. Using the Revolve tool, and we're going to discuss what that is. Also, it must include some sort of a drainage dish. So it'll be two separate components consisting of their own bodies and sketches. I'm going to talk about what that really means. Obviously, we'll be going through this in class, and you'll finish outside. So first is multiple component creation. So far, we've been working on the default single component that Fusion gives us. I'm going to show you how to create multiple components, multiple separate components. This will also consist of your basic line work and sketches and such. We're going to use, obviously, clothesline to create a profile, just like you did to extrude. Only, like I said, in this case, we're going to use the Revolve tool. This creates rotates that profile around a chosen axis. Sometimes it's referred to as a lathe tool, and it's kind of like if you have ever actually used a lathe, doesn't matter metal or wood. It's a round cutting thing. This is creating something round, basically that. We'll also be using the pattern tools. And in this case, a circular pattern tool, both to create holes and other features. This creates copies of a single sketch element or body feature, object, doesn't matter. Pattern tool is really helpful within Fusion around a chosen axis or point of your choosing. Basically, this can change what you've just done with the Revolve tool and add features to that same Revolve tool on its surface. Pretty handy. And again, the extrude for cutting holes into the object this time. We'll also start to play with the appearance tool. Now, this is optional in this project, but I want you to start learning how to use that because it's helpful and it's also an additional feature. Model requirements. This model must be made of at least 2 components. Do not make these both on the same component. You'll have your main vessel and the drip tray, the catch tray, whatever you want to call it. It must be large enough to house a small plant. And frankly, you don't have to make this as a planting vessel, but that's the general idea. Meaning that a max of like 120 millimeters tall, 100 deep, something like that. Deep meaning the actual depth of the project, across, that sort. Recommended wall thickness, about 3 to 5 millimeters. That's a good thickness for this material we're using. It must have drainage holes, otherwise you've just made a teacup. The number and design is totally up to you. And the appearance tool is optional. I'll again show you how to do that. All right. So let's go over just what any of that stuff means. All right. So first things first, save your project. Always start with saving your project. I know you kind of jump right in. I do too. I'm sometimes bad about it, but it's always best to start by saving. So Control save or Command save, or just go up to the save icon, and we'll go with example. Revolve. Oh, be better if I can spell. Revolve Vessel. All righty. So in this case, you can go off of an object if you want, an image. We talked about how to use the insert canvas tool. Not going to use that on this one. Or you can just freeform this. Totally up to you. Doesn't matter. In this case, though, we're going to start with a sketch, but instead of working on the XY plane, we're going to work on the XZ plane. Right there. And just to refer to what we're doing here is I'm creating something directly in front of myself, working directly off of the sketch plane. Now, a few things that I like to work with are, like I said, you need to have it of general dimension. It doesn't have to be that big. It can be smaller. You can make it slightly larger, somewhere around that. But we're working with something about 120 millimeters wide or 120 millimeters tall by about 100 wide. Those are relative. You can tweak those dimensions around if you like. That's fine. But what I like to do is start with a bounding box. And all that is literally just making a box that helps me define that. I'm also going to use this as a construction line. So I'm going to start with selecting that construction line box on the toolbox, or you can just press X. So starting at the origin point, I'm going to go up, and I can tab over. All right, I want that one to be 100 millimeters tall. And then for width, since it's 120 wide, and I'm only starting on half, let's go with 60. Okay, now I've got a construction line box that gives me a general reference point. Good. Finish sketch, and I can just leave that there. All right. Finish sketches. And I'm going to label this as reference. Okay. Now I've started this sketch, but one of the main elements of this project is it must be in two components. The component here is your main set, is the highest set of elements on your hierarchy tree. Now, it doesn't mean it's the absolute top, but it means that a component can consist of everything on here. Basically, a component can consist of, and this little icon right here, the little cube, is the component icon. It can consist of origins, sketches, bodies, any variation of other bodies and elements and tools, joints, all kinds of stuff. But this needs to consist of more than one component. So that means it's going to have, each component is going to have its own sketches and its own bodies. Technically, a component can consist of multiple components. You can nest them within each other. In this case, we want to avoid that. We want to make two surface level components. So to start components, go up to the top bar, go all the way over to assemble, and it's your default icon up here. The little stack of cubes you can also use from the drop down. You'll see you got a bunch of options. Top one is new component. That's what I want. Mouse over that, you can see it creates a new internal or external component. That means that it's either within its own component, or it's either its own component or within another. You can nest them. You can also extract components or bodies, objects from a current project, from a current component, and create an entire new component utilizing that. I know that's like a very vague concept, but just wanted you to know that if you forget to create a start by creating a second component or multiple components, you can still course correct that. But I'm going to start with making components. So select that button. You have your toolbox pop up. You can pre-label these. All right. So I'll start with vessel, And right now there's no parent bodies or anything like that. So it's just standard. So same with standard, or same with type standard. We're not working with sheet metal. We're just working with a standard component. Select OK. Now you see that a new component box, this little cube, has appeared down here. Also at the top of our hierarchy tree, now that single cube icon has turned into a little stack of little cubes. That's showing there are multiple components within this one component project. All right. The other thing that's happened is, it's hard to see, but my sketch line has kind of ghosted out. That's because I have this component currently active. If I go back to the very top, at the opposite side from the little eyeball icon, you'll see a little circle appear on the right side. Select that. That activates the entire project. So that is your activation button. So what I want to do is go back up to the top, select that. I'm going to start another one. New component. For this one, we're going to label it, not stray, tray. Jeez. Select OK. All right. Now it has created another single component. You can see these two components are of their own single component. There's no stack on them. The stack is on the top here. So, all right, now I have my two components made. I can go back to the very top, reactivate everything. But in order to keep things isolated and a little more organized, you want to actually activate the component you're currently working on. So this is a little trip up to the workflow we've been working with, which is just start. So with this, I'm going to start with creating my components. Just like starting by saving your project, it just helps save you a little bit of headache down the line. That's all. So, all right, I've got my vessel active. Now I can start a new sketch on this. Select the same XZ axis, working there, but I have my bounding box on another component, but it's still visible because it's still active and visible. Select the hide icon and it goes away. I'm going to leave that there because I want that as a reference. All right. Now for this, like I said, you can start with a reference image if you like, or you can just kind of freeform it. Doesn't really matter because this is a very organic assignment in that there's no real direct requirements. Now we will discuss this as it pertains to 3D printing and what will be easier to work with or present problems, but we'll come to that. Main thing is you're making a vessel. You're making a taller than it is wide vessel, although not necessarily, because some planting pots are wider than they are tall. So go along with that. But I do have my reference box here that tells me how wide and how tall I can make it. You can make it smaller, that's fine, but that's about how big we want to max out at. From there, honestly, I'm just going to use the fit point spline. So I'm going to start at the flat origin plane, select right in the center, and I'll start working upward. You can make this kind of like a wine glass. You can make it like a kind of kick back. Just remember that if this is for planting a plant in, you do not want to have it shrink at the top, because ultimately then as roots would grow and such, it turned into a root ball in there. You have to smash the pot to get it out of there. So I wouldn't go with much of a curve inward. If anything, I would have it flare outward. With that, I can just start creating a line. There we are. Okay. Remember, you can change this around. However, don't forget that, yes, you can change around any points on a fit point spline. They are interlinked. You can change around with also the handlebars. You can just really warp the hell out of this thing if you want, or just Control Z back to that. But if you had a point that made contact or snapped to that box, it is now going to be linked to that box. I can move it up and down, but it doesn't want to let me move it left or right. Same thing up here. This one I can move left and right, but I cannot move it up and down. What happens if I get to the side? Doesn't matter. I can move it outside of that box. That's fine, but it will not let me move off of there. In order to change that, you have to right click on that point, go down and select delete coincident. That's it's a constraint that is built in. Delete that. Now, I didn't do it. Delete coincident, dang it. There we go. Now I can floop it around. Technical term, floop. So there you go. If you need that. I don't know why I created that point up there. Let's delete that. All right. So I can still play around with this. I can drag this around. Now that it's unlocked, also, I can rotate the whole thing based off that single point. There's some really cool built-in features that unfortunately Fusion doesn't necessarily tell you that they do, but this is definitely the mess around and find out what happens. It's a scientific method. So let's drag some points around. There we go, super duper. All right. Now, well, to create a closed profile, remember you need two sides, top and bottom. It needs to be completely enclosed. You can't just use a single line. Well, you can do two things. You can create another fit point spline, try to match that up, or if you don't want it to match entirely, that's fine too. Or you can make the more efficient way, use the offset tool. Very handy tool. Select a sketch, and this will define a new line. It's not an exact mirror, it's an offset of that line, depending on how far away you make this. In the project, it says, let's make sure that's like 3 to 5 millimeters thick. So sure, let's make it 3. Moves over 3 millimeters. Now you see down here, it has gone beyond that line here. And at the top, it's below. That's because it's operating off of the average direction of a line. If this were an enclosed shape already, an enclosed profile, it wouldn't be a problem, but it would shrink it uniformly out from within that, or outside. You can go outside too, doesn't matter. That's how it works. It's really handy. But we'll select OK there. All right. But to create a closed sketch, well, that means I need to close this sketch. So I got two options here. What I can do here is I can just draw a line straight up. That'd be fine. So with there, let's do exactly that. Line up. I can have the intersect snap to that bar. All right. Or I could just continue and then just trim off the excess. Doesn't matter. Hit escape, but I do have that line there now. Very handy. I don't need that extra dangly bit, so let's go to trim. It assumes that any intersect means that that's a cutting line. So trim off that excess. It's going to give you a little warning because the constraints have changed. It's just telling you you've altered the offset line, which I have. Excellent. All right, now we got the top. So I got a couple options here too. Well, if I want to use this top line as a max line, I can go to modify and extend, and that will extend that line at its current curvature or its best summation to the next available cross line. Select that. That's fine. Now you see that since it has now enclosed, or at least it's using the previous sketch as an assumed other element, now within the bounds of that profile, it has gone blue. That's showing you that it is now a closed profile and can be extruded, or in this case, used as a revolve or anything else. But sharp cornered things are rarely useful. So you got a couple options there too. I can go ahead and extend this. If I use a fillet tool up here, I can't because there's not an actual line there to work from. So escape from that. Let's use a straight line here, point to point. Now I have something enclosed, and it has gone black just to show you that that is now a locked-in line. Lines, sketch elements within Fusion go from blue when it's still technically a transformable line, meaning you can drag it and move around with it and such like that, or it goes to black when it is defining or it is denoting that it is now a defined locked feature. You can still technically move it to some degree, or you can make numeric alterations, but it is now locked in virtual space. This parallel line that's floating above it, this is a constraint showing that it is parallel. It is parallel to the construction plane or this construction box that I've made here. That's all. Just showing that. All right, now I could use the fillet tool and round those out. Convenient. Since I did not hit escape and I used both in the same fillet tool, or I selected both in the same fillet tool, now I can use a slider and they drag in and out. Now be careful because you're going to get some weird stuff happen because this is an offset. Offsets, remember offset lines, it leaves an artifact of the information of that it is an offset, not just a second line, meaning that it's going to try to distort to compensate for any changes to those interlinked constraints in this sketch. So if you want a rounded top, but you're not really sure where you want to go with it yet, then hit escape, Control Z, get away from that. And instead, I'm going to use a circle tool.